I know that there are some among us who really disliked history in school, and I don't blame you. I had some teachers that managed to make history deadly dull. Having said this, I must give you a very brief history lesson, both Bible and non-Bible, in order to make sense of our gospel reading this morning. Hopefully, you will see why this is necessary. We heard Jesus predicting in verse 6 that the temple that they were sitting in would be destroyed. We can figure that he made this prediction in maybe around the year 72. Scholars have now determined that the Gospel of Luke was written around the year 75. A major historical event took place in Jerusalem in the short time between Jesus making this prophecy and the year 75 when Luke's Gospel was written. Just as Jesus predicted, the temple was destroyed in the year 70. Actually, it was much more than that. Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman Empire. There was a desperate siege of the city and then massive destruction. Over 1 million people were killed and almost 100,000 were taken into captivity. The Jewish nation was obliterated. Multiply September 11, 2001 by 1,000, and it still does not come close to what happened in the year 70 AD in Jerusalem, because not only was their homeland attacked and destroyed, but the temple, which is where they believed God lived, was destroyed as well. And by the way, in Jerusalem today, the most sacred place for Jews is the Western Wall, sometimes inaccurately called the Wailing Wall. The Western Wall is a wall of the same temple complex that still has not been rebuilt. So we have this morning Jesus prophesying something that had already happened before the gospel that we are reading had been written. He also predicts wars, earthquakes, famines, pestilence, persecution of his followers, and all of that has come true. He goes on to predict that Christ's followers would be hated and in some cases killed, even by family and friends because of their faith. So far, he's gotten everything exactly right. Then, suddenly, his credibility flies right out the window, at least with me. In verse 18, he says, "But not a hair on your head will perish." As a bald man, I say, Jesus, you're going to be kidding. So the Lord is making bald jokes now? I don't need this. I'll circle back to this in a minute, but let's think for a moment of what it was like in that time. Luke's audience in the year 75 was still in the aftermath of that cataclysmic event 5 years earlier. They were also among the earliest Christians, and many of them were alive when Jesus was on earth. Try to imagine what it must have been like for those people to sort out not only what happened, but how to be in that drastically changed world. To say that they were in a time of transition is an understatement. The world they thought they knew had ended and a new age had begun. It was a time of uncertainty, confusion, recriminations, and danger. Nobody could have been prepared or trained to deal with what was happening to them. They would have related to the well-worn phrase of our age, "These are times that try men's souls." Now, in a world where a word here on training and preparation, we have all been trained to do different things in our lives, whether at school, at work, playing field, kitchen, whatever. I submit that it is no big deal to do what you were trained to do. You could teach a dog to beat a bongo drum, and you could give him rewards to keep him beating the drum if that's what you wanted him to do. So then, not a lot has been accomplished. So doing what you're trained to do is no test at all. It's all fine as long as things stay the same. The great test comes, however, when you are called upon to do things that you have been not trained to do, or for which you have been not prepared, or for which you have been given no advance warning. Being summoned to do something that you are not prepared to do may be the true test of whether or not you are able to apply your skills, your talents, your imagination. The excitement in life can be found in being called upon to placed in a circumstance beyond your control, beyond your management, or beyond your comfort zone, to use a trendy phrase. Because of what had transpired in the lives in that world of the people who first read the words this morning, I feel safe in saying that they were well beyond their comfort zones. They were in a time of transition, and they needed to deal with it. Now I think it's worth pointing out that as dramatic and cataclysmic as their age was, they were not the first to have their lives changed rapidly and suddenly. The Bible is rich with stories of people in transition. It's not hard to imagine Adam saying to Eve, for example, as they made their way out of the garden toward the east, "We are living, my dear, in a time of transition." When the ark finally settled on land and Noah stepped out, when the Hebrew people finally made it to the Holy Land, an end and a new beginning for which there have been no training and no preparation. For the first readers of Luke's Gospel, 40 years after Jesus' ministry and death and resurrection, and just 5 years after the destruction of Jerusalem and the fall of the temple, they were in just such a time of transition. So Jesus, in this morning's Gospel, accurately predicts all the terrible things that will happen to them as his followers. He then goes on to say, "All men will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. By standing firm, you will gain life." He is telling them that the world around them can fall down and they can be attacked as his followers. But if they keep the faith in the Lord, you will gain eternal life. He is saying that they can destroy your home or even your body, but not your soul. Keep the faith in hard times, the times of transition, he is saying, and you will have eternal life. Now, it takes no great leap to say that we are living in times of transition. In geopolitical terms, I think it was the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 that was the big event. The world was very dangerous, but somehow simpler, with two superpowers glaring at each other and competing for control of the rest of the world. The world got a lot more complex after the Cold War, and September 11th was an event that reflects that transition. Some transitions are positive, and some are negative. We have transitioned into the most toxic political atmosphere of my lifetime. I heard an Australian journalist the other day, after a recent election. He covered the campaigns in the election. He was asked about his takeaway from the experience. He said, "I think America is a very unhappy country right now." Tough to argue with that. There was a book that I read in college called Future Shock by Alvin Toffler. It described the increasingly breakneck rate of change that was happening around us. The book was written in 1970, and the rate of change has increased manifold since then. We are in enormous transition just by living our lives. The world that we live in is hugely different from the world that we learned about as children. There's no training for what we are up against. Our children face life challenges and complexities that we can't even dream of. Just in the area of technology, with constant and instant communication, with smartphones, text messaging, and of course, computers. We are in the information age. We can get new organs and joints to lengthen and improve our lives. I don't know how many, but there are numerous replacement body parts in this church this morning. 30 years ago, this was unimaginable. You may see where I'm going with this. This church is in a time of significant transition between the Vitality Program, which has already yielded significant change, and the transition in pastoral leadership. You are in transition, and so am I. It is what Jesus told us this morning. By standing firm, you gain life. He is telling us to stay with him. Don't lose your core. Don't get bowled over by change. Keep the faith. The changes in our lifetimes are amazing, but our ancient religion still holds true to this day. It is our stabilizer in times of transition. Jesus is the compass, the keel, the rudder in shifting seas and changing winds. It is from Jesus that we find our way to deal with radical change. It is from Jesus that we get his strength, his peace, his moral and ethical compass, and that can help us stand firm. In times of uncertainty, we stand with Jesus. God came into the earth in the person of Jesus in order to reconcile God's self with people. If we believe that and live accordingly, that is our preparation for whatever changes the world will throw at us. Amen.